So in the last section, we built a very numerical understanding of this model of demand and supply. And assuming an imaginary market of ice cream and then using some simple numbers, we built an understanding that the demand of a product, it shows us the entire relationship between all the different possible prices and the quantity demanded at each of that possible price. And then similarly, we explained supply as the entire relationship between all the different possible prices and the quantity supplied at each of the possible price. And we assumed both in case of demand and supply that this relationship, this demand, the supply will only hold true as long as all the non-price factors, they stay the same. Whereas we importantly discussed that if non-price factors change, the whole demand will change, and similarly the whole supply will change. Whereas as long as these non-price factors are same, we said that if the only thing to change is the price, then within the same demand you will move to a different point. And similarly also for the supply, if all non-price factors are the same and the only thing that changes is price, we move within the same supply. Price cannot cause changes in demand and supply. It only leads to movements within the same demand and supply. Now we want to put all of these ideas into the graphs of demand and supply curves, and from there we want to show and discuss and explain the whole working of the price mechanism and how the price and quantity is determined through the graphical analysis of demand curve and supply curve of a product. Now the whole idea is very simple, and what we need to do is we just need to convert this definition numerical understanding of demand into a demand curve. So let me again start off with the demand side of things first of all. So basically you see this demand, this relationship between price and quantity demanded. So we have the different combinations of price and quantity demanded at each price. We just need to put them on a graphical space, where on the y-axis by convention we measure the price of the product, and on the x-axis we measure the quantity of the product. And then we just need to plot these different combinations. So this first combination is saying that given this demand, if the price is 50, the quantity demanded will be 800. So you move up vertically on this y-axis till you get to this price of 50, and then you move horizontally out till you get to this quantity of 800. And this point then gives you this first combination. And similarly all the other combinations, such as if the price is 150, the quantity demanded is 400. So you can just move up till 150 and then out till the quantity of 400. Mark this point out, and then once you have put all of these different price quantity combinations on this graph over here, you can just combine all of them together, and what you get is the demand curve of the product. Now these exact numbers, always remember, they are not important. What is important is that if you are using numbers which are reflecting your law of demand, then your demand curve will always come out as a downward sloping line. That is a graph with a negative gradient. Now negative gradient, remember, mathematically all it means is that the variables on the y and the x-axis, they are inversely related. In this instance, the negative gradient of a demand curve tells us that, look, if price increases, then quantity demanded will fall, and vice versa. So negative gradient, remember, it reflects the law of demand, and that is something that you will see sometimes in your MCQs. What is the meaning of the negative slope of the demand curve? Well, it simply reflects the law of demand, the fact that if price falls, quantity demanded will increase, and vice versa. Now, the second important thing that you need to translate from this numerical understanding to this graph is that, look, this demand curve is assuming that all the non-price factors are constant. And if these non-price factors are constant, and then the only thing that changes is the price, then you will move along the same demand curve. This demand curve will remain the same. So for instance, if the price initially is 200, then the quantity demanded at this price will also be 200. That is what our table tells us, and that is what our demand curve will reflect. So if you are starting at this point where price is 200 and quantity demanded is also 200, then if all non-price factors stay the same and the only change in the market is that the price falls to, let's say, 100, now when the price falls to 100, then the new quantity demanded will be this horizontal distance from this price of 100 to the demand curve. That is, the quantity demanded will increase to 600. All along, as we have been changing the price, demand curve stays the same. You just move from this point to this point. Price changes, therefore, remember, will always cause simply a movement along the same demand curve. Now, an easier way of thinking about it, instead of making so many lines, is that you start with any point and then think of a price fall. And the way you think of it graphically is that just start moving downwards, because you're measuring prices on the y-axis. So if you move down, that means you're thinking of a fall in price. Now, to get back to this graph of demand curve, you will have to move right as well, which means your quantity demanded will increase. So price has fallen, quantity demanded has increased. You have moved from this point to this point along the same demand curve. So that is the first thing. Price changes, demand curve stays the same. You move from one point to another point on the same demand curve. Whereas if a non-price factor changes, then this whole demand and therefore this whole demand curve will change. And the way I want you to think about it is that let's assume the non-price factor of income changes, and the consumers of ice cream, let's say their incomes increase and they become much more rich. Then the way we think of it is that, look, now if the price is 200, then previously if this was the quantity demanded, now some more consumers will be in this market at this price because of a non-price factor is bringing them into this market. And since they are coming to the market because of a non-price factor, even if you now look at the price of 100 or any other price, the quantity demanded, whatever it was previously, now you will see that there are a few more customers in the market. So the whole demand curve will therefore move to the right. It will increase. The demand curve will shift to the right, or we say the demand will increase, telling us that, look, regardless of what the price is, the quantity demanded at each price will now be more than what it used to be. And similarly, if incomes fall, if non-price factor is changing in the way that consumers now wish to buy less, then at every price, the quantity demanded will be less than before. At every price, the quantity demanded will be less than before. And your whole demand curve will shift to the left. The demand, we say, will decrease or it will fall. Now, I haven't given you the details of what are some of the common non-price factors that can cause these shifts, but for now I just want you to get comfortable with the terminology, that if non-price factors, they change, they will either increase the demand and shift it to the right, or they will decrease the demand and whole demand curve will shift to the left. Now we can apply the same logics onto the supply side as well. So supply, remember, is this entire relationship between all the different possible prices and the quantity supplied at each price. Now again, we can measure the prices on the y-axis over here and the quantity supplied on the x-axis over here. And then we can simply plot these numbers. So if the price is 50, quantity supplied is 150. So price of 50, quantity supplied horizontally of 150. Similarly, price of 100, quantity supplied is 300. So you move up till this price of 100, and then at the side move horizontally outwards to till you get to this quantity of 300. And similarly, you can now plot all of these price quantity supplied combinations on this graph. These are reflected by these dots over here, and once you have them, you can just combine them all together to get your supply curve. An upward sloping graph this time, a graph with a positive gradient. Positive gradient meaning that the price and quantity this time are related in the same direction. They move together. That is, starting from any point. If you move up and increase the price, then you will have to move right. That is, the quantity supplied will also increase. So that is your law of supply reflected in the positive slope of the supply curve. Now secondly, remember again, as far as the shifts versus the movements are concerned, the idea is again the same. That if non-price factors are all constant, and the only thing that changes is that you were initially at a price of 100 and therefore at this point of the supply curve, now if the price increases to 200, you will just move to a new point on the same supply curve. So price changes, remember, they will just cause you to move along the same supply curve. Price will not change your supply. The quantity supplied will change. You will just move from one price quantity supplied to another price quantity supplied on the same supply, given a change in price. Whereas if a non-price factor changes, because of which producers are discouraged to produce, then at every price, whatever was the quantity supplied, now they will want to supply less. Whatever the price previously, if this was the quantity supplied, now if a non-price factor has changed and discouraging the producers, they would supply or produce less than what they were doing previously. And that is true for any price. Whatever was the quantity supplied, it will now fall. And therefore, whereas a non-price factor changes, the whole supply curve will change. It will in this case shift to the left. Now, of course, sometimes non-price factors can change in a way that encourages producers to produce more. In that case, at each price, the quantity supplied will be more than before. At each price, the quantity supplied will be more than before. And therefore, your whole supply curve will shift. It will increase. It will move to the right. And once you know the basics of demand and supply on the graph, we can now elaborate and explain all of this working of the price mechanism through the graph of demand and supply.